talk about like second sock syndrome. Wow, third and fourth sock syndrome is like a whole other beast. Hi, hello, my name is Allie. I'm an independent graphic designer and writer coming to you from just outside Toronto, and this is my channel where I talk about what I'm knitting, how it's going, and what it's costing me, and today it's not going well. I have to be honest out of the gate, it's not going well. Which, you know what, if you watched last episode, things were not off to a super hot start this summer. Heat waves aside, it's gone downhill. I'm not sure if my knitting brain has gone on vacation. Something's not entirely working here. I have several whip updates to give you that, you know, let's say I have things to talk about today. I have content. If I don't have the progress, perhaps the finished objects that I expected to have by now. Before we get into any of that though, as for my mug and tea of the day, this is my mug from Hoya Atelier, and out of it I am just drinking Twinings Earl Grey because it is a tea bag kind of day. I do not have loose leaf in me today. As for what I'm wearing, this is my All Good tee by Magdalena Parker. I finished this in sort of mid-January of this year, and this is my 8th time wearing it. So considering that the total project cost was $130 Canadian, that puts our current cost per wear at $16.25, which, like, 8 wears doesn't seem terrible since it's only been in my wardrobe for 6 months. I do feel like this is one that I kind of expected that when I made it, the issue would be more the wearability of it. Like, when does one wear a knit t-shirt? What weather is that for? And it's actually proved to be so much more wearable than I thought. Like, I've never really put it on and been like, oh, this actually isn't really viable today. It's much more flexible than I expected it to be. But it's also just such a unique category of item in my wardrobe that I don't think about it a lot. I think there are a lot of days that I could be wearing it and might even prefer to be wearing it over what I end up wearing, but it doesn't like occur to me because it's such a particular thing. So this one still needs to kind of like worm its way into my wardrobe mind palace. So like I said, I have some whip things to tell you about, but I'm gonna be honest, morale is low over here given the state of things. So I think that before I kind of bring myself to get into all of that, I want to kind of take a little detour to just sort of like daydream about a fun, different future project. I need my knitting brain to be somewhere other than where it actually is for just a brief time. Because you may remember, if you saw my summer knitting plans, one of my sort of pipe dream items is the groundbreaking sweater. I'm just in love with the sweater. It was sort of a, if things go really well, maybe I'll be able to cast this on at the end of summer sort of thing. Based on how things are going, there's no way. Which is also part of where the sort of like morale dip has come from. Because I've just been excited to like get through some quick knits as part of my summer plans, and quick knits are just not turning out to be quick knits, and so I feel behind, not in any sense of like I need to be churning out a certain amount or be a certain amount productive, like this is my hobby, I don't think about it that way, but more just in terms of there are things that I want to make, and every time I end up having to remake something, foreshadowing, it's just putting off when I can actually get to those future things that I also want to make. So it just kind of feels like spinning wheels. So understanding, coming to terms, processing the fact that I'm not going to get to the groundbreaking sweater this summer, I just kind of want to like doodle a little bit. So I actually have with me my iPad so we can do a little bit of doodling and maybe plan a future sweater that someday, hopefully, my needles will be clear and I will get to cast on. But that actually brings us to our sponsor for today's video, Paperlike. And this is one that I'm so happy to tell you about because I genuinely bought this with my own money way before they ever reached out to me. I just use this. So what is it? Why am I showing you my iPad? So the Paperlike 3 is the latest version screen protector for people who want to write or draw on their iPad and have it feel more like paper and less like an absolute ice skating rink, which is how I've always felt trying to draw on my iPad. Like, I've been trying to do handwritten notes and sketch and draw lettering on my iPad for years. That's actually why I bought it. I bought it to use for work in that way. And it's just always seemed so much harder than I felt like it should to keep my lines looking crisp and nice, because it's just like shring. And as writing goes, like, I like to think that I have pretty nice handwriting, but on the iPad, like, all chicken scratch. Like, I am lucky if I can read my own notes later, unless I go so deliberately slowly in writing to try to make it match my handwriting on paper, but it takes so much longer to write that way. And the worst part is the Paperlike has been on my radar for a long time, and it just never sort of rose high enough in my priority list to be like, that's what I want to spend my money on right now. And when I finally did, like 6 months ago, I caved and ordered it, and I was like, oh no. Oh, we should have done this so long ago. First of all, the application was so much easier than I feared that it would be. I'm not good at these things historically, but it comes with this multi-purpose helper tool. It makes sure it's perfectly aligned on your device. It's not crooked and looking wonky. It helps clean the screen. It gets all the air bubbles out. And there's an interactive on-screen guide that actually walks you through the whole thing directly on the device that you're sticking it onto. So like it could not have felt more foolproof. And since it's been on, it really does give you that tactile resistance that you're missing on just glass, and it gives you so much more control. So that comes from their nanodot surface technology, which is a microtexture technology that they've been perfecting over years to give you just that little bit of friction that you need to make it feel natural, like writing with a pen on paper. So if you want to give Paperlike a try, you can check out the link in the description of this video or on screen right now. Thanks so much to Paperlike for sponsoring this video and for fixing my iPad. So before I start a bunch of makeshift doodles of this sweater, let me first tell you what we're looking at. This is the Groundbreaking Sweater by Clara Cecilia. This is a sport weight pattern designed to fit busts measuring from 28 to 61 inches, and it costs 80 Swedish krona or about $12 Canadian. This is a 2-color stranded colorwork, typical like top-down circular yoke construction, so super typical stranded colorwork, and it's just beautiful. And I want to figure out what I would like to knit this to look like myself. Part of my problem here, I feel like I'm having a hard time envisioning with this one, in part just because I really love how the sample looks, but I also find it kind of boring for me to just knit something exactly to match a sample. I've done it before, but I tend to feel like I just want to do something a little more creative than that. Part of what I love about knitting is being able to make things in colors that they don't tend to just come in, something that feels specific to me and my taste. And I had an idea for this one. I was looking at yarns, I thought I knew what I was gonna do, and then I was in the knitting loft a couple weeks ago and I was like, you should really just go look at that yarn in person and just make sure it's the color that you think it is, for reasons that will come up again shortly. And when I did that, my existing plan for this kind of blew up because it hinged on this sort of very bright, corally, but very much pink, corally pink color that would be the neon in a neon and neutrals pairing. And when I checked out that yarn in person, it was in fact much more orange, like very, very far to the coral side, less to the pink side than I thought. And it just made it feel A, very different than I was envisioning, but B, also just a lot closer to the sample than I really wanted to do. So it may be that I will end up just trying to recreate that color scheme, but by finding yarn that actually fits what I had in my head. But maybe also I need to look at other options because the color I was envisioning was like a very specific thing and I don't want to be super limited. Like maybe there's just other things that I haven't thought about. So I'll mock that one up, but I'll also mock up some other options and we'll see where we land. So I have my iPad here and I'm going to record my screen so that we can do this together. So first up, I'm looking at my Pinterest board. That's just my like knitting inspiration Pinterest board, which really is mostly a yarn Pinterest board. It's like, oh, I found that this yarn comes in this colorway that I really like. I want to remember that like that's where this colorway exists. So when I go to start a new project, I can see like, oh, this is a worsted weight project. What worsted weight yarns have I saved? What am I excited to have an excuse to use? So I'm just looking here for some general inspiration. The Peer Gynt orange that's here is one that would basically work if I were trying to dupe the pattern sample, which is something that I am considering still, but I'm interested in being more adventurous than that. Part of what I'm finding tricky though is that I keep, for various reasons, wanting the contrast color, like the color of the tulips, to be in a light color. But if I look closely at the colorwork motif itself, I don't actually think that that's a good idea. Like you can see that in the sample, the colorwork is darker than the main color. And that actually makes sense with the motif itself. Like you can see there's more of that contrast color sort of down at the bottom of the tulip in a way that's acting as shading. So if I reverse it, if I make the tulip lighter than the background, it's not gonna make sense as shading because it's gonna be lighter than the rest of it. You understand what I mean? In some colorwork motifs, this really doesn't matter if it's a completely like abstract geometric, something like that. It does not matter which is lighter and which is darker. But sometimes in figurative or representational colorwork, it's like a picture of something. Sometimes it really does matter and really does make a difference. You'll also see this in things where if it's like animals with eyes, if you have an eye that's like mostly white and then has a black pupil in the middle and then you reverse that, you invert the colors so that the pupil is lighter, it looks weird, it looks creepy. And so sometimes you kind of have to pay attention to this. And I think this is a case where that's sort of complicating my feelings because I sort of am intrigued in the idea of doing the tulips in some of these like the Libyanime sort of pinky yellow, or this Princess Pumpkin patch that I don't think that's even still available. But Shayla from Charm City Unicorns knit a hat out of it, and it's been haunting me ever since because it was just so beautiful. I feel like that would be so fun. But again, that would only work in a case where it's darker than the background, and like parts of this are so light, like cream color, like that's so not viable. So I need to let go of that idea. That's part of what this exercise is about, because I sort of have these hooks that have like made their way into my brain about this that don't actually work. So I need to cast them aside. But I think that to do that, I need to replace them with something else. Something else that I could consider might be like this sort of chartreusey knitting for olive color with this more foresty green color for the tulips. How do I feel about the tulips being green? That makes it feel more like it's just sort of like greenery, like non-florals for the flower itself to be green. This is where I'm sort of drawn to like the pinks idea, but again, then I have a background color issue. So let me maybe first mock up what I was first imagining that this would look like with the colors that ended up not being quite what I thought they were gonna be. So first I'm just gonna do a really just like ugly sketch of this sweater. Wish me luck. So now that we have this background shape, this I can easily swap out by just swapping different colors like that. So let's sort of find that like yellowy green color. Say that's our background. Now I'm gonna do a really beautiful job of approximating this tulip pattern. Are we ready for this? She's a graphic designer, everybody. Look at that skill set. Wow. Let's just for my own entertainment, let's make this look a little bit more like a sweater. Add some ribbing. Ooh, And, you know, is it beautiful? No. Does it give us an idea of how these colors interact with each other in the context of this design? I think yes. Actually, let me add just like a little bit more shading to the bottom of these, because I feel like that detail that I'm talking about with the shading is kind of important to how these things fit together. So here it is mocked up with that sort of chartreuse and dark. The color scheme that I was kind of trying to accomplish with the yarn that I found that was not really what I thought that it was more of, like I said, a neon and neutrals. So the background was pure Gint in a color sort of like this. And I want to say that the coral, now I'm gonna have a hard time like creating this color, and that in and of itself is gonna tell me how improbable it was to find a yarn this color. It was like, no, it wasn't a hot pink. It was definitely in the like orangey pink sphere. Maybe like there, let's drop that in. It was something to that effect is sort of what I thought that was. And you can see like this is not dissimilar from the sample. Maybe I can make it a little bit more pink. Let's try just very subtly. Something sort of like that is what I was thinking. Thinking though about neons and neutrals, I'm like, how far can we push this? So part of the trouble with neons and neutrals and color work is getting the amount of contrast that you need, right? Like that design really kind of disappears. Like how much would I have to push this green in order for it to be visible? How much darker does it have to go? Like that even still is quite hidden. At a distance, you don't see that. There you start to be able to see it. But now again, do I want my tulips to just be green? I don't know. What if I go back to the background? What if my back, oh, okay, that's a lot. What if I do like pink on there? That's, okay. That's probably very fun for somebody. I think that's a bit much even for me. What about, to calm down this background, bring it back to the neutral idea. Okay. What can we see? I'm like, oh, what if we do orange? But like, oh, what if we just copy the sample exactly? Like, there we are. Or maybe more of a yellow orange. That becomes a delicate balance of making sure that there's enough contrast. But I also feel like I'm still very much like within the comfort zone of this. I think I need to push this more. Let's do something totally off the wall from what I've been looking at, just to like, how do I feel about the flowers in a dark teal? Like we saw There's plenty of dark teal inspo here. Maybe I'll have some left over from my storm sweater. Unlikely. At least especially unlikely to be enough for this kind of project. But, you know, there's no shortage of teals, many of which came from the comments on the previous video of mine where I talked about looking for a good dark teal. So thank you if you were the one who suggested something that you see on there. But let's see, what if we do, let's calm this down. About like an orange and a teal? What does that do? That's not it. That's not what I want. I don't know. I keep coming back to like, maybe it needs to be a little bit more gray than that. But just something more neutral. I think part of this in the back of my head, I really want to try Pure Gin. Not that this is actually a DK weight pattern, it's technically sport weight, but I tend to be able to get away with using a larger yarn than is intended and meet the same gauge. There it is, a sort of like a rustier. Oh, she picked an orange red. She likes it. Shocking. I do like this though. It looks the same as the sample. That's so boring. Not that I don't want to specifically not knit something in the color that I want just because it's the sample. I just really want to be exploring my options and making sure that I really like thought through what I want it to look like. I guess I should probably demonstrate what I'm talking about though with like the shading element. So like if I make the contrast color the lighter color, see how, I mean, this is not a super realistic drawing, so the shading issue is maybe not as evident as it would otherwise be. But do you see what I mean? Where like, because this bottom shadowy part at the base of the tulips is lighter, it just like doesn't have the intended effect. Yeah, I don't love the green. Hang on, let me go back to my Pinterest. Like, I am intrigued by this chartreusey color. Also, still love that Fua Fua color. I use that in my kilometer scarf, but I have been thinking about the possibility of using a color changing yarn for the contrast color, but this is where, again, we get into that issue of foreground and background colors, or like contrast between the main color and the contrast color, because most of the color changing yarns that I've been drawn to and that feel sort of springy, tulipy, like conceptually appropriate are very light in color, which then poses an issue of like, well, what is the background color then? What if we have like a turquoisey? Okay, we definitely need a different main color for that. Like a dark teal? I don't hate this as a combo. The problem is that I just do not like wearing this color. I always feel just like a little bit dead in it. So let's see, what if we do, did I try yellow and orange? Is that too like autumnal for like a springy motif? What if it's more pinky? Or like a raspberry? No, it's veering into ketchup and mustard territory. Do not want. I am interested in like a bright yellow for the motif, obviously on a color that it would actually show on. Again though, I do think it needs to be the darker color. So that would mean, okay, what if it's on like a almost white, like a cream? Could work. I really thought this was gonna like give me ideas and like show me what I want to do, and instead it's just showing me, oh, this is exactly as difficult to figure out as you thought it was. So lest you watch my color theory video and think that I've gotten it all figured out, no, I am still doing all of this poking around. I am just at least doing it with some basis of knowledge of what I'm doing. This makes it look like snowflakes. I know what I'm doing, I don't know what I want, if that makes sense as a distinction. Did I do something like this already? Like light blue and orange? Oh right, except that I don't want to wear light blue. Is this how, like, I'm gonna do all of this and end up right exactly back where I started and be like, well, I guess I'm doing pure Ginton and orange. I think my challenge with this one is that I prefer, I think, to wear like sort of mid-tone or darker colors for the most part, but that's challenging when your motif needs to be darker, like when the contrast color needs to be darker. And I want the whole thing to have like an overall springy vibe because it's tulips. You see my problem? Like I could do a yellow. I don't sound like I'm confident about that. I think what I'm finding hard about this is that I keep thinking about like, well, tulips aren't yellow. Like I keep thinking about the leaves being part of this. I'm like, well, the leaves should be green, the flowers should be another color. But like, no, we're not going that literal, that representational. Like looking at the sample, her leaves aren't green. I think it looks perfect and beautiful. So I need to try to get this out of my head. I do keep kind of coming back to this like yellowy green versus bluey or green contrast. I do really like that as a palette in general, like a more limey green versus a more foresty green. I keep feeling like this is such a good one for neons and neutrals, but it's hard because neon all over is going to be quite overwhelming. So like the motif kind of has to be the neon part, but it's hard to have a dark enough neon to give you the contrast you need. You know what I mean? This is just tricky. It worked more easily in my Arden top where it's honestly not that much contrast, but it's just because like the swaths of color are so big that you don't need the same level of contrast for it to read as like different. Yeah, I fear that we're ending up exactly where I started. Like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to do that Peer Gynt with that corally pink? You just need to actually find something that actually looks like that. I also was looking at this on the left, the Freshwater Mermaid there by Sweet Pea. That is very interesting to me, but it's not really viable. I keep getting attached to things. I'm like, no, upon reflection, this does not work because there's such dramatic lights to darks in that yarn that what background color is that going to reliably pop against and not have weird parts of the motif showing up way more strongly than others in a way that sort of interferes with the image? Another alternative to that that's sort of more toned down version and is more consistent in tonality is this Wild Woolies at sort of the top middle right. That would work a lot better for that. But like, does it feel tulipy? Like that one I get stuck on because it feels a bit too like watery to me. Really hard in this particular case for some reason to me to come up with a combination of colors that contrast enough, that contrast in the right order in terms of which one is darker and which one is lighter, and feels like it makes sense with the motif, like what it is, and feels like the seasonality of how those colors feel also makes sense. Do you know what I mean? It's just, there's a lot going on here, and I'm kind of led to believe that the only palette that makes sense is the one in the sample. And this is a hard one because there were not very many projects on Ravelry to look at. Like there are 3 projects, 2 of them have photos, and actually both of them do with the thing that I would not want to do, which is that they make the contrast color lighter than the background color. But I kind of see why, because you see the trouble that I'm having coming up with a color combination that I like for this. So I'm like, what? What is a knitter to do? Wow, yeah, I really thought this was gonna be like clarifying. Instead, I am as lost as ever, but that feels honestly appropriate for today. So thank you for coming along with me on this adventure. And I'm gonna put this away now. So do I have any more idea what I'm gonna do with that than I did 15 minutes ago? Well, honestly, probably just go try to actually find the color that I thought that I was finding with that neon-y coral one from the Knitting Loft, because it's different enough from the sample that it makes me feel like I did something, and I remain convinced that it might be the best option. I think I am more convinced than ever that it's possibly the only correct option for me. So if anything, I guess this validated what I was already thinking.
Editing Alley, I just saw that Margot Shan is cast on a groundbreaking sweater. Margot Shan, her color palettes are always incredible. Usually doing something like super creative that is like very different from the sample and like very just like bright and interesting, and I always love it. Let's take a look at what she's doing. It's really confirming that there's basically only one correct color palette for this sweater. I will note that in this case she has swapped like it's very similar to the sample except that the background color is darker than her contrast color, so she is doing the thing that I'm trying to avoid, of making the tulips lighter than the background for like shading purposes. But the fact that the tulips are still this like corally orangey color is very funny to me, so I think that's just what color they like have to be. I don't know. So if you can think of this pattern is written at Sport, but I'll probably knit it out of DK. Sports is hard to find. I want an excuse to try Peer Gynt. So if you can think of a DK weight yarn that actually comes in sort of that bright, like corally pink kind of color, please let me know.
Okay, now let's get into some whip updates. And if last time I said that the fact that I had 2 whip updates was a bad sign, today I have 3. Read into that as you will. So whip number 1 that I'll tell you about first, and I'll tell you about it quickly because I have so very little to update you on. And that is my storm sweater, which I, recording 2 weeks ago, really thought like, okay, like I'm off to the races with this. I will have so much more to show of this next time I give an update. And this one, actually, this is the only one where nothing has gone wrong since I last updated you. It all already went wrong in the previous episode. But this one just kind of got set aside for reasons that we will get into. But before that happened, I just want to show you the tiniest bit of progress that I did make, which is that I joined at the neck. So I think last time I had a back panel and 2 little front panels, and now it is one big piece. So this is my storm sweater. To give you the project stats on this real quick, this is the storm sweater by Petite Knit. Pattern is designed to accommodate busts measuring from 28.25 to 61.75 inches. It costs 50 Danish kroner, or about $11 Canadian, and this is a DK weight pattern. So I am knitting this out of the Sonder Yarn Co. Sunday Morning DK out of the colorway Dream State. And I can now tell you, because I actually did remember to look this up when I was editing myself last time, being like, maybe I should remember to look up how to pronounce this. This is a 75% BFL, 25% plot twist of the century, Massum. That was never on my list of ways that might be pronounced. 25% Massum base. And I love this yarn. It's very nice. It's very squishy. Color is beautiful and rich, and I love it. It just looks like not merino, looks like it came from a sheep. Looks a little bit rustic in the positive way, not the derogatory way, and it's just been nice to work with. So I picked up 7 skeins of that in Sonder Yarn Co.'s Valentine's sale. I think it was 14% off appropriately. So that meant that the yarn cost me $251.70 Canadian. It was about $35, I think, in savings. So adding in the pattern cost, that puts my total project cost at $263 Canadian. And due to gauge, I'm knitting this on 3.5 millimeter needles rather than the 4 millimeters written in the pattern. I just found that it was looking too open. I did not like how it was looking. And I'm knitting the size 8 in the pattern because I wanted a lot of extra ease. I know this is already written to have a lot of ease. I wanted more ease. I measured an oversized sweater in my closet that I love the fit of, and I'm trying to knit to get as close to that as I can. So yeah, this got, I think, maybe 5 rounds after I talked about it in the previous video. And then it got shelved in favor of the next whip. So say hello and goodbye to the storm sweater. My current thinking is that once the next whip that I tell you about is finished, that I will circle back to this. But depending on exactly when that falls in the summer, that may or may not happen, just depending on how it falls around different plans that I have, and just whether I need something a little more mindless to work on, because I have been really enjoying this pattern, but it does really require me to have the pattern open, be following it closely. It's really not a hands-off kind of pattern in that way for me. So TBD on whether this is revisited sort of imminently or in a little bit. Either way, I will definitely be back to it. I've liked working on it. I definitely want this sweater, but that's where it is for the time being. All right, my next whip. This one is sort of an emergency gift knit, I'm gonna say. Someone in my family is going through a really bad time right now, and I decided that I wanted to knit them a pair of socks. Just as a little I'm thinking of you, here's something that hopefully helps keep you a little bit cozy, that sort of thing. And I was thinking, this seems like a really good opportunity to try out my friend Audrey of Fire and Fibers pattern for her banana socks, because I don't know what size shoe this person wears. I don't begin to know how to size a sock correctly for them. And the magic of the banana sock is that you don't have to because it has no heel. And it's called a banana sock because it looks like a banana. It has this fun ribbing that kind of forces it to curve in this way that the heel can just kind of land wherever it lands, and it always kind of makes sense and always kind of fits, and it's sort of weird and magical. So I was curious to try these out, and this seemed like a really good excuse to do it. This pattern is written with fingering weight in mind, but I think you could use any weight of yarn. I think you could adapt it basically any way you wanted to. The pattern does specify you can do this with any stitch count. That's sort of your perfect vanilla sock recipe, but as a non-sock knitter who doesn't have one of those and always feels sort of at sea when a pattern tells me just cast on however many stitches you usually do, I really appreciated that Audrey in the pattern gives if you don't have one, here's mine. Thank you Audrey, because I don't expect that I know things. I feel like sometimes sock patterns expect that if you're knitting a sock, you knit socks, you're a sock knitter, in a way that I'm absolutely not. So I did appreciate that. This pattern is $1 Canadian, by the way, so very small investment for a very useful pattern. It is simple, but it's very well written in terms of sort of giving you little tips and feedback along the way that I really appreciated. And these this is where we get into the issue of morale, because these should be a finished object for you today. The first thing that went wrong on this project went wrong before I even cast it on. I went to the Knitting Loft to pick up my online order that I placed. They had a sale on for 20% off. The sale was ending like the day before I could get to the Knitting Loft. So I placed it online, picked it up in person. And when I picked it up, it turned out that what I thought was beige was like a baby pink, which is just a very different vibe and not one that I was nearly as confident in selecting for the recipient. So I was like, oh, and I asked like, oh, can I just swap the colorway on this? Like, sorry, this just isn't what I thought that it was. And they were like, oh, we're so sorry, but because you got that in the sale, it's final sale. And I was like, okay. Okay, fine. I guess I'm just gonna buy another yarn. And now I have this yarn, and truthfully, I don't particularly care for this colorway, so I won't be knitting it for myself. So maybe I'll come up with a sock recipient who I think this would be more up their alley than it is mine. In any case, I paid for a second set of sock yarn from the Cozy Knitter, this time in the Cider House colorway, which I can show you looks something like this. And you might be thinking, Allie, you're holding up 2 socks. Those look like 2 complete socks. How is this not a finished object? Let's look closer, friends. Can you tell that this sock is 10 stitches wider around than this sock? This is a 72 stitch sock. This is a 62 stitch sock. And therefore also this one is longer because the yarn went further because it wasn't traveling as far around. And I was unaware of this discrepancy until I was working the cuff. So important point of note, these socks are knit from the cuff down. However, I did a provisional cast on so that I could go back and knit the actual cuff at the very end, because I didn't know how much yarn the toe was going to use. So I wanted to just, of the little mini solid from the sock set, I wanted to use up whatever the toe was going to use and then know that I could just keep knitting the cuff as long as I wanted to, as long as my yarn was still going. So it was not until I had finished the sock all the way down to the toe and I came back and I picked up for the cuff, and I was trying to figure out why I couldn't make a 2x2 rib work. Why the numbers weren't working out. Why is this not divisible by 4? I'm sitting there and I'm counting and I'm like, 62, yeah, 62, that's not divisible by 4. Why? How did I do it on the other one? And then I went, oh, it's not supposed to be 62. It's not supposed to be 62, it's supposed to be 72. So I had done the first one correctly, and the most annoying part of this to me is that I would have preferred to have been knitting these 2 at a time. That's generally how I like to work on anything small that comes in pairs. But I was knitting these on my 2.5 millimeter needles.
I think, Allie, I forgot to mention here that the needles that I'm talking about are the needles that I got to do my cat cowl, that I was like, I had to pause my cat cowl because I didn't have the right cord for my needles. So I have it now, and that's what I'm knitting the socks out of. I just haven't gotten back to the cat cowl, but to be clear, that is what I'm talking about with this whole mini needle cord saga.
Which, as discussed recently acquired these. I love my Luca Cypress set, my interchangeables, but they don't go down that far. I could not get something smaller in a 2.5. It breaks the set. You need a smaller cord, all these things. So I got the 2.5 millimeter, but I bought it with a different project in mind. So I got a shorter cord that doesn't really... Who is calling me? And I went to try to order a larger one, but from the place that I have found that seems to be easiest to get sort of random one-off interchangeable set pieces from, that's Knitting Anxiety on Etsy, they just currently are out of stock of the larger sizes on specifically the mini cable that you need for those really small needles that are under 3.25 millimeters. So I was working them one at a time, sort of reluctantly already, because I just didn't have a cord that I could knit 2 at a time on. So the fact that this has now come back to bite me, where when I cast on the second sock, I just miscounted. I must have, like, when I counted, thought that I was like at 50 when I was actually only at 40 or something, you know? And because I wasn't looking at them side by side because I was doing them one at a time, I just like finished one, put it away, and cast on the other. I was never comparing them side by side until I noticed this issue, and then I went, oh no. So I realized this issue. I was with my family, I was visiting at the cottage, and my sister is watching this all unfold, and she's like, okay, so like you should just get more yarn, right? And I was like, what? And she's like, well, you already knit 2 socks. Like, are you gonna unravel that whole entire sock just to re-knit another side. Like at this point, you might as well just make a second pair of socks. And I was torn about this because on the one hand, I've already bought 2 sets of sock yarn for this project. So I already bought this one. Like, do I really have to buy a third one of these? So that was my first item in the con column. Second item, I was really hoping to, by the end of that cottage visit, have these socks finished. Like I was starting the cuff on the second sock. I really thought I was going to be done, and it would have been convenient because I could have sent these socks via my parents to their destination. It just all would have been very convenient to have finished them at the cottage that weekend. And I was like, if I rip it out now, I might still be able to restart the sock and get it done by the end of this visit. But it would be sort of dicey. I don't know if I actually would have enough time. Like, it would be close, and do I want to be like rushing trying to do it? And to my sister's point, you're ripping out an entire sock's worth of effort. On the other hand, socks are not my absolute favorite thing to knit in the world. So like, I was excited to be almost done these. Do I really, like, if I already have to knit one more sock, okay, like that's enough of a commitment. Do I want to have to knit a whole second additional sock? Do I want to have to knit 4 socks instead of, at this point, 3? Also, now that I say 3 socks, this is now bringing me back to when I was working on the pole dance socks earlier this year, also for a family member. Things kept going wrong. I ended up knitting a total of like 3 socks worth of knitting to get the pair. Like, what do you mean I can't count? What do you mean? What do you mean I couldn't count these stitches correctly? It's such a silly mistake. And the fact that I did not catch it until the absolute end, or like, if it had been divisible by 4, if the number of stitches had actually worked on the ribbing, I think I would have finished the whole ribbing not thinking about it. I wouldn't have thought about it until it was fully done and I sat them both side by side, like to take a picture before blocking. And I would have gone, why is one of these so much longer than the other? And even then I was confused when I realized what was happening, because I had been knitting the second one I wanted to make sure it was the same length as this one, so I was counting the number of colored stripes, and at first I was like, but how is it longer? It has the same number of stripes. I made sure it has the same number of stripes, and then just realized, oh yeah, like the stripes are just going to be a little bit taller in this one because the sock's a little bit skinnier. It's the same number of color stripes, they're just slightly differently proportioned. So that's not entirely where I'm at, because I did in fact buy the second or third set of sock yarn for these. And this is where I'm at on the third sock. So this is the 72 stitch one that I'm redoing. And I will in fact make a second 62-inch one. And that does work out fairly well because, you know, I had sort of been thinking that it would be nice to do something for their spouse anyway. Now they will have matching socks, and I do know that they will find that very cute and very adorable, and they'll be very happy about it. So I do know that at least as mishaps go, like this one will work out quite all right, perhaps for everyone except my sister, who definitely was gunning for that spare set of socks. But this is where we're currently at with the banana socks. So I have half of 2 pairs of banana socks, and this is a really wonky one for project cost because, like I said, I've now bought yarn for this 1 pair of socks, now become 2 pair of socks 3 separate times. And because I don't have a plan for this, I don't really feel justified in like deducting the cost of this from the project cost when these at some point become something else, or maybe I manage to sell it off to someone and recoup some of it. At that point, I can sort of retroactively deduct the cost of this from this project, but at this point, this is entirely part of the cost of this project. So that puts our current yarn cost at $126.56 Canadian. So these are some expensive socks at this moment. Individually, the worst part also, this one was on sale, the other ones weren't, because at that point the sale was over. So including tax, I believe that the full price sets were $45.20, maybe something like that. It was $38 or $40 or something like that when it was on sale. So 3 of those put together, that's where we are, and then adding in the $1 for the pattern, that puts us at like $127.50 Canadian. So up until my realization of disaster, I can't even say disaster struck. Disaster struck like at the very beginning, I just didn't notice. But up until the point where I noticed my disaster, this was going swimmingly. I was so pleasantly surprised to find how simple these are to knit, because when I was looking at the pictures, I genuinely couldn't figure out like how these are done. Like just from the pictures where you have the ribbon going one way and the ribbon going the other way, I was like, are you actually knitting like 2 halves of a sock separately and then seaming them together? Like, what is going on here? But that is in fact not what's happening. It's so much simpler than that. You're knitting it in the round like any other sock, and it's just like down the back is a standard vertical ribbing, and the front is actually just horizontal ribbing. So like you are just knitting some rounds and purling other rounds, and that is what creates the horizontal ribbing. That is what kind of like pulls the middle of the sock in to create the funny banana shape. So these were sort of like fun and satisfying to work up in that way, just because they're just kind of like funny and goofy. I like them. The only other thing of note, I think, of me working on these is that I made a slight modification when I was working the toe. I think the pattern has you doing your toe decreases at the very edge, and I just find that my decreases just look kind of messy when I do it as like the very last stitches. So I just did it like one stitch in from the edge of each side of the sock, and it looks nice and clean that way, and you get a cute little like raglan sort of vertical line down the side that just looks better for me than my personal decreases do when they don't have any kind of buffer like that. Oh, and since I did a provisional cast on to start these, that meant that this cuff edge is a bind off, not a cast on, which is also another reason that I wanted to do the provisional, because I have just had a hard time creating sock cuffs using a cast on that provides enough stretch to comfortably fit sometimes, particularly for my dad, who's usually the one that I'm knitting socks for. So in this case, I did the surprisingly stretchy bind off, so this should be plenty stretchy to get on, and it's still like, it's not enormous. Like I think on their calf it should be totally fine. It looked a little bit like wild and lettucey when I first did it, and I didn't like it, but when I blocked it, I just like pinned this out so that the ribbing would like sit in that state, and it looks much better, so I'm happy about that. And it still has definitely plenty of stretch to like cling to the calf of the person wearing it. But because I was at the cottage when I noticed this disaster and I couldn't immediately go get new yarn, that is what led me to start on the next whip that, I mean, I had brought to the cottage thinking that I would start it in the event that I finished these. Not that I was on hiatus with them, but you know, it is what it is. That brings us to my third whip. What a day, who am I? So this is actually a case of an item from my summer knitting plan's honorable mentions graduating into a concrete project. Applause, applause. Everybody be very happy for it. This is the Palm Springs tank by Leslie Forrester. This is one that I'm really excited to actually have promoted into a real project, because this is the kind of like perfect staple basic that I've been wanting to knit this pattern for like a year and a half now, and it just has never quite risen in the ranks enough to actually happen. But I was thinking, gonna be at the cottage. At the cottage, I really love to do some like reading and knitting in a way that I often just don't do at home. There's usually just like things on TV that I want to be watching, and so I'll just do that while I'm knitting, and it just, the reading and knitting doesn't happen as much. But at the cottage, where I'm always trying to be outside, I'm not watching TV, I'm not doing that, reading and knitting is a lot more appealing. So I wanted to like set myself up for success in doing that. And I knew that the storm sweater was so not how that was going to happen. Just, it's too elaborate, there's too many directions. So I was like, what is something that I could cast on that is like plain stockinette? And this is me doing a little like foray into multi-project things. Discuss in a moment how I feel like that's shaking out for me, but it made a lot of sense to me to cast on something all stockinette, and that seemed like the perfect opportunity to finally tackle this pattern. So this is the Palm Springs tank by Leslie Forrester. This is a fingering weight pattern designed to accommodate busts measuring from 29 to 70 inches. So wonderful size inclusive range on this one. I'm knitting the size 3. I sort of fell right in the middle of the size 2 and the size 3 range, but because this is a pattern designed to have negative ease, and I'm knitting this out of a mostly plant-based fiber, I didn't want to be erring on the like more stretch side of things, so I decided to go with the size 3. This pattern costs $10 US, or about $13.50 Canadian. And speaking of that mostly plant fiber yarn, I'm knitting this out of the Wandering Flocks Cotton Lino base. You may recognize this from my Colette pullover if you've been around a while, but in that case I ended up pairing it with a mohair because I was trying to use it as a DK weight. That was ill-advised. So here I am using this sport weight yarn as a fingering weight. I'm doing the opposite. I'm using it as a smaller yarn than it is because my gauge tends to come out small. So this base is a 35% organic cotton, 30% mulberry silk, 20% linen, 15% baby alpaca. So there's a lot going on in here. And this is their pyrite colorway, which I love because this is sort of the like dirtier, muckier version of their citrine colorway that I knit my Colette out of, that beautiful chartreuse. My mom was asking me like, what would I call this color? And I'm like, I can't think of anything flattering to call this color. I don't think that it's vibrant enough to be a chartreuse. Like, to me, chartreuse really has to be like bright and sort of clear in color in the way that the citrine is in my Colette pullover. This is too mucky for that. I think this is gorgeous. I love this. I didn't buy it because I think it's ugly. However, what can I call it other than like baby poop. Like, I don't, I got nothing. I mean, they've called it pyrite, which I recognize was the name of a stone, but couldn't picture what, so I looked it up. Fool's gold is the like colloquial name of pyrite, which this is a little bit more green tinged than like a pure gold, or than I would expect like a fool's gold to look. This is definitely a very goldy, not chartreusey, but like mossy. You know, like it is more yellow than I even expected when I, again, ordered it online in the Knitting Loft sale. So I was picturing it a little bit more green than it actually is. In any case, it's this very sort of mucky, in-betweeny, mossy, greeny, yellowy, ooky color that I think is really fun. So I picked up 2 skeins of that, which in the context of the sale cost me $70.50 Canadian, and adding in the pattern cost, that puts our total project cost at $84 Canadian. So like I said, I'm working this a little bit off gauge because I'm using sport weight yarn instead of a fingering weight, but considering that I often feel like my fingering weight, like this is a fingering weight piece, and I just feel like this fabric like could stand to be a little more substantial than it is. Like I just always feel like my finger weight things are just a little bit open. So this I'm knitting up on 3.25 millimeter needles. I believe it's written at 3.5, but I was like, considering I'm using a bigger yarn, as long as it doesn't make it feel too thick and too dense, I should probably stick with smaller needles just to try to keep my gauge on track. And my stitch gauge is actually perfect with this. Like I'm meeting it exactly. My row gauge is actually big. So like I imagine because I'm using a thicker yarn, my rows take up more height. So the pattern I believe is 40 stitches per 4 inches, and I'm at about 36 stitches. So that is just something that I've been keeping in mind as I've been working like the back and the front pieces relative to like armhole shaping and things like that. But a lot of the pattern instruction is actually like measurement based. It's like knit until this length. So while some small parts of it will end up a little bit longer than written in the pattern, where it's like, you know, certain numbers of increase rows, most of it, the parts where it's just knitting straight, I can just knit to the intended measurement. And honestly, if anything, like we're talking about armholes here, my last tank top in this category was the Sailor Swift, where my armholes ended up far too tight. So I am not upset about having a little bit of extra height in those armholes. So to show you where I'm at today, this is my little like itty bitty, it's almost like, you know, when there's like a shrug that's just like a sweater, but it's really only the sleeves. This is like that, but even less. There's not even sleeves. But we can see it's been joined now. It's all in one piece, which is relatively recent. It's joined by like 2 rows, almost nothing, but I have it on try it on tubing now. I'm not going to try it on camera right now because it did take a lot of wriggling to get in and out of it. So I'll pop up a picture of when I tried it on yesterday so you can get a sense of scale. So this pattern is going to involve adding like edging around the neck hole and the armholes. That's pretty thick and substantial. So this is going to end up with a lot more coverage than it looks like it has right now when I try it on. So far, I think I'm looking good on the armhole front, but it's something that I'm staying vigilant about. And we'll have to make sure that as I'm doing that edging, that I'm knitting an amount that isn't too much. Like maybe I have to make the edging a little bit smaller to make sure that it's still right. One thing I do appreciate about this pattern is that I do feel like Leslie Forrester is speaking directly to me when she writes things like, the exact amount of stretch and the way that it lays is really important for this edging. So while you may be tempted to use other methods, sewing down the folded edging is really the best option, trust me. I don't know that I've ever felt more seen when following a knitting pattern, because yeah, I absolutely, when presented with doing a folded edge, like the edging on this tank top is going to be, I absolutely would read that I'm supposed to sew it down and go, no, I'm going to knit that down. She saw me coming a mile away and said, I see you, but it's not going to look the way you want it to. Trust me, in this case it's different. In this case, you really need to do it the way I'm telling you to do it. Trust me. And the fact that she went out of her way to do that makes me think that she's probably right. She said something about like, trust me, like I've tested like a bunch of different ways and like this is the only one that made it lay the way that I wanted it to. So I'm like, okay, fine, Leslie Forrester, okay, fine. Thank you for seeing me coming and you know, warning accordingly. So that's something that I will be contending with. I think that that's something that I would like to contend with sooner than later, now that I am no longer at a cottage, no longer trying to do a lot of reading and knitting. My intention is to kind of shelve this one until the next time that I'm in a similar scenario. There are going to be a few of those throughout the summer. So I kind of want to just keep this as my like cottage weekend reading and knitting sort of knit. And if I am to do anything on it in the meantime, it should be doing that edging, because like all the pickups and stuff, obviously that's not conducive to reading and knitting. Like that I could stand to get done, and that will also help. Like I think I will want to do all of the edging before I finish it, because that affects how it sits as far as the length and everything like that. So that I wouldn't mind getting done before the next time I'm packing this away to take with me somewhere. But I am finding it hard to not just keep knitting on this. Like I just want to keep working the body, especially like I just got it all in the round. Like this had all been worked flat. I'm so excited that it's finally at this point. And now I'm like, what do you mean I have to put it away? This is where I don't, like I understand in theory, like I know it's very popular for people to have different types of projects for different contexts, different like, oh, I want to like watch a movie and so I want to work on this, or oh, I want something like that really requires a lot of brain power and focus, so I'll work on this. And that makes so much sense to me in theory. But here I am in practice and I'm like, but I want to just keep knitting on it now. My storm sweater's already paused. Like that might as well not exist anymore. I just want to finish this. Like I'm very just like tempted to continue focusing on the last thing that I worked on. I'm trying to convince myself to leave it alone. If not, at least just do the edging, probably do like one armhole to like see if I'm on the right track as far as my pickup, and then do the other one and go from there. And it will be funny when this kind of looks like a nice, really polished, perfect top of a tank top and then has none of the rest of the tank top. But those finishes will just make such a difference to how this looks. So I am kind of eager to do that. I'm eager to see it. I'm not eager to do it because I know that pickup is not going to be fun for me. Especially if I find that I have to do it multiple times to get the right armhole size. But that's where this is currently at. I am tempted to keep working on it, but I am telling myself, no, it's not the time. We'll see how that goes. Oh, almost forgot. This one was not without mishaps. It was a good pick for the cottage in that it is plain stockinette. Of course, like with starting any project, there's always like a little bit of fiddliness to like get cast on and get going. In this case, it started with the back panel that you cast on for, and then you're mostly just doing a lot of like knitting straight until you have to start doing like armhole shaping. So I was like, great, I just get to knit for like inches and inches and inches. Perfect. I don't have to pay attention. I can just like read and knit for hours. Sweet. And then it got a little bit fiddly when I had to pick up to start the front straps. Like they're so small, you're turning constantly. Like you're not getting into a flow with like reading and knitting like that. But then I got to the point where you cast on your neck stitches. And so I'm like, okay, great. I get to like knit straight again until I have to start doing armhole increases again. And once I reached that point, I just kind of got carried away with like, oh yay, I'm at the part where I just knit straight, and I misremembered the number of inches I was supposed to be knitting to by quite a bit. I was like, oh, I think I'm almost there. Let me double check what I'm knitting to, and then went, oh, I've already overshot by like 2.5 inches. Okay. So I did have to rip that back and then go from there, but plain stockinette, ripping back was not hard, and it was only half because they weren't joined yet at that point. So that was not terrible, but I'm just saying this last couple weeks of knitting have not been without errors. So yeah, I think my knitting brain is just on summer vacation. I don't know, it's a time over here, but we are getting places. The other thing, I'm like, but should I save it for the cottage or should I just get it done because then I can wear it more this summer? See me rationalizing abandoning my plan? This is why I can't have more than one whip. All right, that's the end of my knitting updates for you. I feel like that was a real like we powered through. That was like a speed run. I'm not used to having so many whips, but I'm glad I'm not sitting here 3.5 hours later into recording, so good for me. And let's do some off the needles. So first of all, small business shout out. I gave my sister her birthday present when I saw her at the cottage, and I did nail it, if I do say so myself, because she has been on a real sourdough kick in the last maybe 6 months or so. She's been super into it, which I love because I love to eat sourdough bread, but maintaining a starter is just like she tried. She gave me one and I tried it out and I said, no ma'am, this is not for me. I'm not about this life. I'm so happy that you are though. Thank you so much. And for her birthday, part of her gift, I found these perfect sourdough storage bags on Etsy that they're beeswax lined on the inside. But I feel like beeswax things can be kind of like unpleasant to use. They just get kind of just the like stickiness. It's kind of weird. So these bags are beeswax on the inside and they're linen on the outside. And they're super cute. And the best part is my sister opened it and she was like, oh my God, I almost bought myself something like this, but I didn't because I didn't want to spend the money. And that is music to my ears, because to me that is the absolute perfect gift, is the thing that you actively actually wanted yourself and you just have a hard time justifying spending the money on because it's like a nice to have and you don't need it and you would really like it, but it's just, you just can't justify it. that is what the perfect gift is to me. So when she said that, I was like, yes. Anyway, so these are from an Etsy shop in Canada. I will link them in the description below. They are just the perfect gift for the sourdough baker in your life, as proven by my sister. All right, now let's get into some books. As usual, these are all linked in the description, but I also want to remind you, check your local library, whether for physical books or audiobooks. You can usually get audiobooks, and even if you don't actually want to take books out of your local library, go get a library card, because so much of library funding is just based on how many cards exist. Just go get a library card. Just do it for the good of society, okay? Speaking of libraries, I'm blocking a library tag on this one because this came out of my local library book sale recently. This is Verona Comics by Jennifer Dugan. She's an author who's been in my head to check out for a very long time and has just never quite made the top of my TBR pile. So when her book popped up in the sale, I was like, perfect, this is the time that I'm gonna do it. And I just always love a Shakespeare retelling, reimagining. Anything that like riffs off of Shakespeare is just fun to me. So this one, the premise is that like her stepmom owns this like tiny indie comic store. His dad owns the like Amazon of comics, and you know, family rivalries ensue. And I'm always curious to see how particularly Shakespearean tragedy retellings play out, to see like, well, like how tragic are we gonna go? Like how hard are we going? Are we doing a twist ending? Are we doing like a slightly lesser version of the ending? Like are we going for it? Like what are we doing? So I was really curious with this one being Romeo and Juliet, how that would play out. And I'm not gonna tell you that would be a spoiler, but that did keep me sort of like interested all the way throughout. And at first I felt like this was sort of just very like loosely inspired. I was like, oh, this feels like Romeo and Juliet in name only, but actually where I feel like a lot of retellings, again, because of the problem of like how tragic do you actually want to go, they often like start to veer off of the original source material the closer you get to the ending. This one I felt actually started to resemble the plot of it more the further into it I got. Like the second half felt much more Romeo and Juliet than the first half did. Like despite its source material, this was sort of like mostly like lighthearted and sweet and fun, and I liked her writing. I would definitely be interested in checking out more of her books in the future. The next book that I finished was Cherry Baby by Rainbow Rowell, which is her newest release. I always love a Rainbow Rowell book. And this was the most mixed I've ever felt about a Rainbow Rowell book. Like I love her style, so the reading experience, just like page to page, line to line, I loved as ever. I got through it pretty quickly, but I finished it and was like, I need to talk about this book in a way that I don't usually. And I don't really want to get into too much detail here because most of my conflicted feelings surround the ending of the book. But so I actually posted in my Patreon group, where this was not our book club book. It had been one of the contenders but hadn't been selected. But I posted just being like, hey, did anybody read this book anyway? Because like I have thoughts and nowhere to put them. So a couple of people actually had read it. And so we ended up having a little side chat about this book because I feel very torn about the ending. So if you have read this book and you also have feelings, please leave them below. I would love to hear your thoughts about this book. One other thing that came up with people in the Patreon, and that isn't at all a spoiler and feels like something worth mentioning if you're like, oh, maybe that's a book I'd want to pick up. This book talks a lot about the main character Cherry's like body image as a woman living in a fat body has for her whole life. Also clearly influenced by the author's life herself. And there have been very mixed responses to sort of how that's done. Like, is that nice to see yourself represented on the page in a full sort of honest, realistic representation of like thoughts that somebody might have, ranging from like the highest and lowest points of their self-confidence? Or is it too front and center, or sometimes too negative? Is it just honest? Is it just too present at all times? Like, is it too much a part of the character? And I don't feel like I have a lot to go off of personally in terms of what I make of that. And I get the impression that there have been a very wide range of reactions from people whose life experience does align more closely to the characters. So like, it's a very to each your own kind of thing, I think, in that way. And so like, if that is something that will hit close to home for you, then I think like just you need to sort of use your best judgment of whether a character who talks about that a lot, both positively and negatively, is going to feel like you are seen, or is that going to feel like you are being smacked over the head, you know, or sort of being prodded about, or even in a way where like maybe it's something that you've worked really hard to move past thinking this way and you don't want to have that in your head, you know? So I would say take care, use discretion with this one if that's something that is personal for you, because I read completely different reactions to it from various people, and they all made perfect sense to me. So do with that what you will. But the premise of this book is basically that Cherry's husband has left her. He is like a comic artist and his stuff is blown up. They're making a movie about it. He went to LA and he's gone to LA and he's gone. He had an affair, he's moved on, and Cherry is sort of trying to rebuild her life in the aftermath and reconnects with an old sort of like missed connection from her college years. So if you also have thoughts, please let me know what they are. Like nest them in a comment that says like spoiler, whatever, you know what I mean? Anyway, moving on. All right, last book. I'm so happy with the size of this book update, given that I gave one 2 weeks ago. It's summer, I've been to the cottage, it's been good for reading. So, Compound by Aisling Rawle. This one made it onto my list because it is reality dating TV related. So this was recommended by, I don't remember if it was Emma or Claire, but one of the hosts of Love to See It, which is one of my favorite Bachelor and reality dating TV in general recap podcasts. And this is sort of a like light thriller slash dystopian, but with very sort of like normal daily life contemporary kind of vibes, set inside of a reality TV show that I would say is sort of a cross between Love Island and Survivor. And it was so weird in just the best way. I thoroughly enjoy this. It's interestingly written to me, where the tone of it has sort of the like almost like haughty, distanced voice of something that skews kind of literary, but then it's about this very like, and I don't mean this derogatorily, but like lowbrow culture kind of way. Like reality TV is not highbrow content. I love it. And one of my favorite things is to like dissect lowbrow things in sort of a highbrow way, like to give it that level of attention and cultural critique and focus. So that was a really interesting like intersection for me. I found it really kind of strange being like inside the head of someone on that show, where like their behavior on the show sounds like someone who'd be on the show, but then like the way that their voice is being expressed in their head is like through this sort of literary filter that I'm like, are we sure that you're someone who would go on the show? It doesn't really map. But I really enjoyed this. I find some of the quotes on the back of this book perplexing, because like one quote, for example, says a blistering takedown of reality TV. And the book is certainly critical of reality TV, but to me, in a way that is so clearly like the call is coming from inside the house. Like, as someone who also loves and watches so much reality TV, particularly in the dating genre, like no one is more critical of it than me. Like, it is typically people who love it and are invested who are also the closest up to like see what's wrong with it or how it reflects what's wrong with our society and all of these things. And so to me, I'm like, this is not a takedown. Like, this is written by someone who clearly engages very much with reality TV. Like, there are so many little details in this book that could only come from someone who is a fan of reality TV, or like you simply wouldn't know. Like, you just wouldn't have that level of insight. So to me, this is the kind of perfect like blistering critique from someone who loves it, from someone who's like, yeah, this is my guilty pleasure, not because I think there's anything wrong with watching like lighthearted, goofy TV, but because I know there's stuff wrong with this. I see the dark side of this, but I love watching it. And I feel like this book is that tension incarnate, and it was good. I feel like actually it's strengthened in my mind. Like, I only finished it a couple days ago, but I feel like it is so strong in my memory. Like, this is one where sort of the totality of it feels more sort of robust and memorable than it felt when I was actually reading. Like, when I was reading it, being like, I feel like this is a good, like, 3.5, 4-star read. But after finishing it, like, I'm remembering it as like a 5-star, if that makes sense. So like, I feel like she was really cooking here. There's something going on. So if you are a watcher of the genre, but you too have like a critical eye toward it, I think you would really enjoy this book. So next up on my reading list, I think I need to break into Yesteryear, because that is this month's Patreon book club pick. We'll be digging into that in sort of the last week of this month. So if you want to join, there's still a little bit of time. And thank you so much for coming to knit with me today. If you'd like to be here next time, I hope you'll consider subscribing if you haven't already. But if you already have, you're my favorite, and I'll see you next time.